Um, Before I sort of show you some of my holiday slides, let me just give you a little background of how I got into this, what we now call social impact investing. But 23 years ago, when I started on a journey, there was no terminology. I called it social venture capital because at the time I was running a biotechnology venture capital fund. So if I can have the first slide, please. This was a slide that sort of caused me to pause to think about my own philanthropic activities. Next slide. This is a 30-year graph. The red shows the amount of aid and charity that's gone into sub-Saharan Africa over a 30-year period. The blue or green line shows the GDP of these countries over the same period of time. It's almost as if the more aid, the more charity that we've given to these sub-Saharan African countries, the more we've damaged their economy. And somehow in the West, we are still besotted with this whole idea that all Africa needs is just more aid and more charity. So that was the beginning for me to transition out of my biotech venture capital funds to ask the same question: can we use a venture capital approach? Can we use a fund management approach to intentionally identify social challenges, environmental challenges, and then use an investment approach to tackle these kinds of challenges in a way that can be scaled? So you kind of have the next slide. We're just going to skip a number of these slides because of time. I'm going to show you, next slide, show you some of the stuff we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So today we've got a number of different classes of these kinds of investments. We have for a long time what we call ethical investments, which are just negatively screened investments, basically do no harm, right? It's no tobacco, no pornography, no defense, etc., no gambling. And today we have what we call the ESG types investments, which is what I call do less harm. This is the environment, social, and governance type investments. And there's a lot of funds, a lot of money that's going into this particular sector. But it's not a totally do no harm. Lithium mining is horrible. Cobalt mining is poisoning our rivers in the Congo, right? It's doing less harm. It's not entirely do no harm. What we are talking about is really intentionally doing good with our investments in a way that transforms communities and tackles social problems. So next slide, please. The framework that we use in our investment is really one of human flourishing. How is my investment going to create an environment for human flourishing? God put man in a beautiful garden because you can't just develop and grow to your full potential in a slum. Slums are not good places for human flourishing. Slums are not good places for our children to develop their fullest potential, right? So in all the things that we invest in, we take a pretty holistic view, and we're saying, how is this helping to create environments for human flourishing? Next slide, please. So this is some of the projects that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. This was my first project. We bought 4,000 acres of degraded farmland in the middle of a really poor province in South Africa. What can you really do in those kind of places as a philanthropist? You can build a school, you can build a clinic, you can build an orphanage. Those are all good things to do. We need to do more of them, but it was never going to shift the needle. So this was a project that asked whether we can rewild the land and in the process create an enterprise solution to the poverty that we have in the district. 85% unemployment, right? Next slide. So that's one of the stories we'll be talking about tomorrow. Can we rewild the land? We lost the equivalent of 3.7 million hectares of forest last year. That's the size of Switzerland. And friends, no amount of money that we put into renewables is going to help us to get to net zero if we continue to lose forests on that scale. So we need, as stewards of God's creation, to think hard about the forest, about what God has given us. And this is a big project where we planted 30 million cuttings of a shrub that captures carbon but is eaten by elephants and rhinos as well as goats and cattle onto 12,000 acres of degraded farmland. Is it possible for us to be agents of God on earth to restore the earth? You know, the Jewish phrase, tikkun olam, is a really beautiful phrase. It's basically translated as fixing the world that is in disrepair. We are agents called to fix this world as it is in disrepair. Next slide. Next slide, please. Low-cost schools in the slums where we charge $5 per child per month. Started with one school in 2009. Today, we have 5,000 schools with 2 million kids in schools. How do we scale this? And this is where we need to bring in real capital. Our investors are now sovereign wealth funds, able to give us significant capital so we can go and build these kinds of businesses to scale that also addresses these social and environmental challenges. And we'll tell you the story of how that scaled. Next slide. Toilets in the slums. You know, we have a franchise toilet business. We have 4,000 toilets in the largest slum in Africa, in Kibera. Those of you who know Kenya. In Kibera slum, you fly over Kibera, you'll see these patches of blue. That's our toilets, where women primarily have been able to sort of own some of these toilets, and we charge per use. We service about 140,000 people every day. But the only way to make money from this is to take the waste away every day to convert it into two products. And it's only selling those two products that makes the thing viable. Next slide, please. So that's another story that we will tell. This is a business that we've invested in the Philippines. Survivors of the sex industry. How do we help them to become independent again? How do we restore their broken lives? How do we help to restore something God's image in these lives? So 250 women trained to do photo editing for real estate companies in the United States. These guys take their photos, downloads the data into the Philippines, and these women just do the photo editing and a video, and it ships data back. Right? And using this model now in other hotspots of human trafficking. Next slide. And I think this may be the final one. This is a call center inside the largest prison in Singapore, where we employ 80 men and 100 women to do a call center, upskilling them, paying them a minimum wage, so that when they're released, what happens is that they're restored to their families, and we rehire them in a call center in the city. Profitable business, has huge impact. We can reduce the reoffending rate from 35%, which is pretty good in Singapore. In the UK, 60% will reoffend within 2 years. We can reduce the reoffending rate down to 3 to 4%. Right? So this is about restoring lives, restoring broken lives. Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, to restore the brokenhearted. Right? So these are all ways that we can use to bring good news for the poor. So these are some of the stories that we'll be talking about tomorrow. Thank you.